I've gotten several questions and posts regarding the XK A280. I have read in posts that they have changed the board in the XK A280 and it no longer binds to multi-protocol transmitter. If anybody can confirm that, let us know in the show notes. If the new board has external receiver ports, whether it's DSM or whether it's an S-Bus port, let me know that too. Because if it has a DSM or S-Bus port, then all you have to do is add an external receiver to it and you'll be able to bind up to a multi-protocol transmitter. Now, I think that the original one had that capability, if I'm not mistaken. But a lot of people are, they're not understanding why they can't bind up with OpenTX, and I for the life of me, I don't know why manufacturers keep changing these protocols, keep playing musical chairs with these protocols. I guess they don't understand that they will sell more of them if you can use them with a hobby grade transmitter. But that's the way it is. All right. So anyway, if anybody knows those two things, let us know in the comments section. Okay. All right. The other thing I've gotten a lot of questions about, not only with binding up to OpenTX, but a lot of people are having problems getting any movement out of their rudder. Now, I don't know if you guys have looked at my setup file that I've published for this plane, but I go over my linkage for all the control surfaces. On this plane, you have a steerable tail wheel, so that the linkage from the rudder servo to the actual rudder control horn is a two-step process, right? You've got the control horn on the rudder servo, you've got the control horn on the steerable tail wheel, and then you've got linkage that goes from the control horn for the steerable tail wheel to the control horn on the rudder. Okay, so in order to get a decent amount of movement out of the rudder, you've got to have your linkage set up properly from all the way from the servo arm to the control horn on the steerable tail wheel, and from the control horn on the steerable tail wheel to the control horn on the rudder. Now, if you want more movement out of your rudder, you need to have all those linkages interconnected so that you get the maximum amount of movement at the rudder. What I think is going on is that people are getting confused with the linkage between the rudder servo, the steerable tail wheel, and the rudder, and they're not getting their linkage set up so that they get much movement out of the rudder. So I will try and explain that in this video. All right, so let's take a look at, first we'll take a look at the setup file that I've published, and then once I explain the linkage, we'll take a look at a picture of the control horn where the steerable tail wheel is, because I think that's what's confusing people. All right, so all right, and there'll also be in the there's if you look at this setup file that I've got here, it's a PDF file. You'll be able to download it if you want to download it. There'll be a link in the show notes. But all these blue text here, they're all linkable. Okay, they'll load up in your browser. All right, so I also have information on how to increase the performance of this plane with a different prop and a different LiPo. All right, those are all the information is published on the playlist. This playlist right here is clickable. All right, so if you want to click that, it will take you to the playlist. All right, control linkage setup, and I think the other things are easy enough to understand, but I wanted to go over the rudder linkage. All right, and then you guys can look at the rest of it. But on the rudder control horn, on the innermost hole, you want it on the innermost hole on the rudder control horn. On the rudder servo control arm, you want it on the outermost hole. Now on the rudder control horn, it's a 3-hole control horn. You want it on the innermost hole. On the rudder servo arm, it's a 2-hole servo arm. You want it on the outermost hole. All right? Okay, now here's where the tail wheel comes in. On the tail wheel control arm, from the servo, on the servo control rod, you want to take the servo control rod, you want to connect that to the innermost hole on the control horn for the tail wheel. All right, and then the linkage that goes between the control horn on the steerable tail wheel to the rudder control horn, you want the rudder control rod connected to the outermost hole on that control horn for the tail wheel, and at the other end you want it connected, like it says up here, to the innermost hole. All right, mechanically that is going to give you the maximum amount of movement out of the rudder control surface that you are going to get. All right, so I think a lot of people must have those two reversed. I think that's probably why they're not getting any movement out of their rudder. Or it's either that or they've really messed up something, with the firmware on the new board that they put in there. One of the two or both. I don't know which. But, people have been asking me about this, so I will show you how I have mine set up. Okay, all my dual rates are set at 100% on the input and on the mix. Everything is at 100%. And then my expo is 20, 20, 10 for the aileron, elevator, and rudder. And it shows you the amount of control surface deflection. So if you're not getting the same amount of control surface deflection that I'm giving you right here, then make sure that your servo arms are centered up. If you got to use some sub trim to get them centered up, make sure that you've got the linkage connected the way I have it listed up here, as well as on the tail wheel control arm. And then take a ruler and measure. You'll measure it. The aileron is 14 millimeters up, 14 millimeters down, elevator is 7 and 7, and the rudder is 6 and 6. Not a lot of movement on the rudder, but there's enough movement on the rudder that you can get nice coordinated turns with this plane. It's not a problem. All right? That's what I have in mind. 6 millimeters of movement left and right with the way that I have the linkage set up. Okay, so now what I want to show you is I want to bring up an image, and I'll show you an image of that so you can visually see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the tail wheel. Here's the control arm for the tail wheel. You can see that the control rod that's coming from the rudder servo is connected to the innermost hole, which is 2 holes to the innermost hole. And then I have my linkage connected on the outermost hole on the tail wheel and the innermost hole on the rudder control horn. Okay, the way that linkage is set up is going to give you the maximum amount mechanically, the maximum amount of movement you're going to get on the rudder. And make sure that you have your rudder set up, dual rates on your rudder set at 100%, right? If you're using the stock transmitter, there's a high and a low rate button on it. Make sure you've got it set for high rates. All right. And my guess is you're probably going to get more movement out of it in 3D mode than you're going to get in 6G mode. All right. 6G mode is going to be really, really restrictive. All right. So that's what I have for you guys. I hope that clears up some of the confusion, associated with the linkage setup on this plane, to where you can get some decent amount of movement out of your rudder. I have not had that problem. Okay, I don't have a lot of movement on the rudder. It's still pretty restrictive at 6 millimeters, but it does give me enough rudder authority, not for doing really good, hammerheads, but for making coordinated turns. Yeah, it's not a problem. So if you're getting less than that, double check your linkage and make sure that you've got it set up the way I have mine set up. Anyway, I hope that helps you out. Don't forget, anytime that you guys have questions, check the playlist. I create a playlist for almost everything that I publish, whether it's a transmitter, whether it's gyro, whether it's a plane. I typically, all the videos that I create and publish for that particular item, I typically make a playlist. And so you will find a lot of additional information in the playlist, probably stuff that you have not seen yet, that will help you with tips, and I might make modifications and adjustments over time that will help you. So don't forget to take a look at the playlist for different aircraft as well. That might answer some of your questions. All right, so that's a wrap on this episode. Stay tuned, and I'll see you next time in the Tinker's Lab.